Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm glad to see a few in-person people here, and I hope some other in-person people join us. And I can't see people on Zoom. I assume you can see me. So I hope there are folks there as well. So I wanted to do this. This is part of kind of rolling out communication and trying to have more communication about the strategic transformation process. And so I hope to be able to answer some of your questions today. And I'll leave time at the end for Q&A for both people who are present as well as people online. And I'll give instructions about that at the end. But I do have a fairly formal presentation, and I'd like you to let me get through the presentation, and then I'll leave that time at the end for questions. So if you're good to go with that, I'm ready to dive in. Some of you know me very well, and some of you don't. And so I just thought I'd say a little bit about myself as an administrator, because I know some of you because our kids went to school together, or we're in the gourmet dinner club together, which meets this Saturday. Or we served on committees in the past or whatever. But a lot of you don't know how I operate as an administrator, so I thought I'd say a few words about that. My administrative style is one of seeking input, because I think that the best decisions are made when we have input and we have constructive conversation about the various topics that we're having to make decisions on. And so in this transformation process, since I've taken it on, this is my approach to dealing with it, to engage in those conversations, either with me personally or having other people engage in conversations as well. And you'll see how that plays out as I go along. In the end, though, administrators were hired to be administrators, and part of that administrative duty is making decisions. And so we will be making decisions at the administrative level, but that decision-making process really needs to be informed by many voices on campus. So that's my general style of administration. So a little bit of history on what is leading up to today in this conversation. So you're well aware that when Chancellor Dutta came to campus, he established the Vision 2020 for our campus, which we've been treating kind of as a strategic plan on campus since it was established in 2020. And then COVID hit, and we all know what happened then. So there wasn't progress made in this effort at that time because we were so just swamped with everything else. And then Chancellor Dutta had to start the transformation process, the strategic transformation process. We spent a lot of time in 22-23 working on that process. So I'm going to come back to that and continue that story, but just sharing the impetus for why we needed that. And you're all well aware of this, that we have had a steady decline in enrollment. And because our budget is heavily based on enrollment and therefore tuition revenue coming in, this has had a significant impact on our campus. What this shows is from 2014, we had an enrollment up around 8,500. I don't know the exact number. And today it's around 6,100. And so you see a steady decline. The blue line is total enrollment. The red line is undergraduate enrollment, and the green line is graduate enrollment. And there are many reasons for this. And I'm sure you're all well aware of them, and I don't need to go back over that. That's been presented many times on our campus. So last year, the deans were asked to reduce expenses. And they did this in many different ways. They reduced the number of sections taught. So if there were numerous sections with low enrollments. They combined some of the sections and did some of that scheduling type of thing to reduce costs. They reduced reliance on LEOs in order to retain tenure and clinical track faculty, because when they were reducing sections, there were fewer courses to teach, and so that was the impact. And in some cases, they modified curricula or had programs modify curricula to gain some efficiencies. And throughout today, if I give examples, more of them will come out of CHS just because that's where I came from and that's what I'm most familiar with. So examples of CHS on that, we had an occupational therapy program come on board. Occupational therapy is similar to physical therapy. And so we decided to combine some of the courses. So I think there are either 4 or 5 courses that are combined between the two programs because there was significant overlap, and that gives us cost efficiencies. So there are things like that done across campus to gain efficiencies. Financial viability is not an option. It is a must, a necessity. And I like this quote: change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. We can't keep going as if we had 8,500 students. We don't have 8,500 students. Our budget doesn't support that level of where we were at. So we need to make change. And that's a necessity. I have made it clear that I expect all the deans to balance their budgets. That's always been the case. But we can't ask Ann Arbor to fund our deficits. That's not what this transformation process is about. That's been made clear to me. And I just want to put that out there because I want transparency in this process. And so the transformation is about building us up, not covering deficits. So we need to do that ourselves, and the deans are working on that. So it is about transforming. And so this is an opportunity for us to change and modify, and we need to be looking to the future to do that. And so we'll be talking about exactly what's being looked for. But I can tell you now that I'm getting to know the regents more and the president more, they're looking for things that will support this community in terms of economic advancement in the community. I keep hearing that word come forth out of conversations. And so we need to be able to prepare a workforce that can go out and work or attend graduate school to go on and take positions after that. But they're looking for us to be that engine in this community to drive that. So planning in 2022 and 2023, we assessed our current programs and did that against enrollments, quality of the program, and alignment with workforce needs. That's what the deans were asked to do last year, and some of that activity took place. We were asked to explore new programs where there was opportunity in the marketplace so that the students who we graduate can go out and become successfully employed. And then to identify student support services or programs that will advance retention, recruitment, retention, and graduation rates. And there's nothing new there. This was all what I'm assuming you were all aware of that we were doing last year. So when I became interim chancellor, I started asking more questions about the work that was done last year. And it became evident to me that that the amount of faculty and staff involvement across the university varied in this process. And so we can't be successful unless we're all engaged, right? You heard that in my freestyle administration. We need input from everyone. And so some of the academic units had faculty heavily engaged. I know my unit, the faculty got sick of hearing from me, and because it was on almost every faculty meeting agenda. Where I came back, we had a very iterative process for what we submitted. But in other units, that was not done. I think I heard that across campus, people were allowed to submit ideas. And those ideas were actively reviewed. But then in some units, it didn't have that iterative process of engaging in conversation about those ideas. And I know CAS is one of those units where there was less conversation with the faculty. And I've been here long enough, and I know there was so much going on in CAS last year because of all the changing departments and SANs and things. I understand why it was hard to get to this conversation. Because if you don't even know who's in your college, it's hard to have a conversation about the planning for the college. And so I've talked to President Ono about slowing down the process so we can engage faculty in that discussion. And I've talked to Jeanette about engaging faculty in discussion. And so there's time this fall for that to happen. So that's 2023, and then going back and pulling in some more discussion. So the strategic transformation to date. Chancellor Dutta took the academic portion of the plan to the regents, to the president and the regents at the May regents meeting. Then in June, he took the student services portion of the plan to the regents. And then in July, he resigned, right? So that's kind of where it stopped. And President Ono said there's a pause. And there was a pause because he had to figure things out in that transition. When I was contacted about the interim chancellor role, I always started my conversation with, well, I'm not interested in it unless we're advancing the strategic transformation. And so I made it abundantly clear that that was my agenda item. And it also, honestly, is theirs. And so, but in that process, in the dialogue I was having with the president, I wasn't getting all the answers I wanted about where we are in that process. And so he allowed me to speak with Regent Hubbard. And so I got feedback from both the president and from Regent Hubbard about what we need to do to advance the plan. And so I'll be sharing that today. This was the feedback. There were metrics, or there weren't metrics identified for the plan. So we need to define what those metrics are that we're using to measure success with the plan. They want benchmarks. And by benchmarks, what I'm saying is, I'll give you an example benchmark. That, you know, if we're launching a new program to attract students, how many students would we have, let's say, after 4 years of implementation or 5 years, whatever that is? So we'd have the metric being the enrollment in that case, and the benchmark being the number of students that we would have recruited into that program at X date. Okay, so for all the plans, they're wanting to see these metrics. And remember, their goal is to help make us financially viable so we can support ourselves, and to help us be a service to our community, right? To provide the workforce for our community and serve our community. So our benchmarks are going to be varied, but absolutely, I can say they absolutely have to include enrollment, retention, and graduation rates. Those have to be there because that's the key thing that the regents will be looking at. There will be other benchmarks, and especially because we need to measure things on the student services side, where it may be the health of our student engagement, many other things that we're looking there. So we will have other benchmarks, but the key ones that the regents are interested in are those RRG metrics. Then faculty have gone to the regents and have asked, why are you funding Detroit and not funding Flint? Right? I've heard faculty ask that. And so I didn't bring it up, but Regent Hubbard brought it up with me during that conversation. And when she talked about it, she said, in the situation with Detroit, is that there's engagement from the community saying we need the University of Michigan involved here in our community. And so she gave an example of the regents being invited by the mayor of Detroit to go out to dinner. Just so there's conversation, they can talk about that relationship. And so I will be reaching out to our community and have already done a little bit of that, but we'll dive in much more heavily after today with that. I thought it was more important to focus on reaching out to the faculty and staff on campus before reaching out to the community. So I will be doing more of that. But we need to get that engagement, and we do have a lot of support in this community. So it's not like we're starting at ground zero, because we do have many members of our community who are very actively supporting our campus. But we need to get that voice heard at the level with the regents and the president. So that's part of the game plan. Okay, so our work in 23 and 24. I created a strategic transformation integration group because in the proposals that went down before, there was an academic proposal over here and a student services proposal over here, and they weren't at all integrated. And in order for this to be successful, we need integration of those two parts of the proposal. And so I created a group. I went to cabinet and to the dean's group and asked about who might be the most appropriate members to be part of this. So it has all of the deans in the group. And then at the recommendation of Chris Giordano, we included Dawn Markell, Julie Snyder, Lisa Sankrat, Zachariah Matthew, and John Girdwood. And those folks were selected because they tied into the focus of the plan in that area. And then Chelsea Duncan's providing support out of the chancellor's office for some of the functions. I've also, because we have this whole process going on at the same time that we have a higher learning commission, huge report due. It was too much in the provost's office. And so I've asked Sanja to really focus on the higher learning commission work. And then I brought Yenner Candigan on to be an advisor to me and help with the strategic transformation part. So we're just kind of dividing and conquering the task before us this year. And then Rob King has been helping because marketing is just a key part that came forward in all the plans. So I've asked him to be a resource person to the planning group. Jerry Glasgow is a resource person as well because he can help us on the finance side. And And then the cabinet also will be involved at different parts, working with that group. So that group has started working. We had a full day retreat in September and met because really the academic group didn't know what the student services side had submitted. And so we just did some sharing at that retreat and kind of game planned, and then split into subgroups to start thinking about those metrics and benchmarks and things. And so that group is really tasked with two things: coming up with those benchmarks and metrics, and then also trying to integrate the aspects of those plans. Now, I recognize that some of the academic plan was incomplete because, like I said, I mentioned CAS in particular, there wasn't as much engagement of the faculty. And so I've talked to Jeanette about reporting back to this group later this fall, so there's time to re-engage faculty a bit. So we'll make sure that happens. Okay. Where am I supposed to point? Okay. Okay. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about the plan when it goes down and what it will look like. And it will have to include some of these things: existing programs to expand. They're really interested in some of our current programs that we offer that do have good enrollment and could potentially expand because there's a market need for that. And so that will be part of the plan. New programs to develop. And those, again, would have to be aligned with the marketplace and what the needs are in the marketplace, as well as looking at our own capacity. Like, I was asked if we could develop a program. I forgot what it was. And it was like, that's not even something appropriate for our campus. Like, if somebody asks us to develop astrophysics, that's probably not this campus, right? So it has to be something that aligns with who we are, what faculty we have, or what potentially we could develop. Student support services. There were a ton of great ideas around student support services that were provided, ideas that came from staff, ideas that came from faculty, and all of those were evaluated with thinking in mind about whether they impacted recruitment, retention, and graduation. And so that was the lens through which those were evaluated. And they were evaluated by cabinet, and they were grouped because there was a lot of overlap between them. And so they grouped them together and then created a list that's under consideration. That list was later in August was shared with the deans, and the deans concurred with the list that was created by cabinet. So there was academic input as well. Anyways, then the final part will be space renovations. And I have to say that I'm real confident in the interest in terms of inclusion in the plan of the first three. I'm not sure of interest in the space renovation part. And when I'm saying interest, I'm talking about interest of the regions in funding kind of construction, remodeling kind of things. So I'm still trying to assess that. But as of right now, that's still targeted to be in the plan. But we'll have to see on that. So on the academic portion of the plan, one of the other comments in feedback that I received was the plan that was submitted, the regents felt, well, it was just too much all at once. And that, for a campus our size, we wouldn't be able to roll it out, all at once. And so the recommendation was to have some type of staged or phased plan. And so I'm envisioning what we develop is a 3-phase plan, and haven't defined the phases, but I'm thinking a year or 2 for each phase. So this, might be a 5 to 7 year plan overall, with phases of what we implement. So I've been talking with the group about prioritizing, what would be in that first wave, second wave, third wave for implementation. And the last bullet here is on the academic side of the plan. I will not be sharing the specifics of what is going forward. And the reason is I come out of healthcare. I know how competitive healthcare is. And I know that every single dean in health sciences has been asked to develop new programs because there are jobs in healthcare, good paying jobs in healthcare. And so I don't want my friend and colleague over at CMU to know what I'm up to here on our campus. Because some of the programs that we're proposing, there's only room for 1 more of those programs in the state of Michigan. And I want it to be us and not them. And so I know that doesn't feel comfortable. I recognize that. But I'm not going to share it. And that's the reason why. That doesn't mean in your own unit, you shouldn't be having those conversations about what's coming out of your unit, because I absolutely think you should be talking there. That's what that is. But I am going to share with you on the student services side. So if you read this, it says ideas under serious consideration. And that's because the decisions haven't been made yet. We're still really discussing this in terms of what can go forward. And recognize we can't include everything. In the end, we have to be able to fund this. Yes, we'll get some, what the transformation funding would be is really startup funding, right? And it's startup funding for the academic programs that then have to become self-sufficient. And on the student services side, they are not a revenue generating part of our campus. And so we just have to keep in mind that as we add student services, we have to be able to fund them ultimately. And so we just have to proceed with caution, but we all recognize we need student services in order for the academic services that we provide to be successful. So that's why we need this integration of the academic and the student services plan. So I would say almost every proposal that came in said marketing. And so that's just an obvious first thing that we're including here. That will be included in the plan moving forward, some funds for marketing. Online teaching effectiveness and infrastructure support. I don't know if you remember or paid as much attention to this as an administrator. I did. But when COVID hit, or let's talk about pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, when a student took an online course, there was a fee attached. That fee was used to fund ODE, or whatever ODE was called back then. Oh, yeah. Thanks. So when COVID hit, there was a decision that because everything had to be done online, we couldn't justify charging that fee. And so we took the fee away. That meant funding for ODE went away. And we had to figure out how to fund that. And we've done that. Actually, when I say we, I have to give accolades to Jerry Glasgow, because he's been able to kind of pull things together in a way on that, and does an amazing job with the university budget. And we're still looking, we need to strengthen that. But Nick Gasper put forward a proposal, and I don't understand Nick's world completely. I mean, I needed help advancing a slide here so you can tell. But he put forward a proposal that would cost some initial money, but would set us up to be more self-sufficient in that area. So ultimately it would reduce costs. So we put that in. A centralized hub for academic support services. Support services are just all over campus, and it would be nice to have them in one place. So they're easier for students to find, so there would be more collaboration across that. So, I mean, we're talking physically in one place. But the other thing is we have some inadequacies in our support services. I know as a dean, I was hearing that we couldn't send students over to DAS because DAS simply did not have sufficient space to even do the testing that we needed done with students. And so over in CHS, we adapted a plan, met with DAS to get their help in devising a plan to do some of that testing in our own space, just because they couldn't handle the numbers we were sending over. So there are some things that space could resolve, and also having services grouped together. And so that's part of the plan. Then international student recruitment and support. Some of our programs have significant potential. Some of our existing programs and proposed programs have significant potential to attract international students, but we don't really have a lot of support there right now for international students, either for recruiting them or supporting them when they get here. And so there's a proposal for that under consideration. Then the first year campus experience. There were a lot of ideas, both from the staff side and the faculty side on this. And so this is one that I think a lot of us could get excited about, trying to make that first year experience more exciting for the students. I was at a faculty Senate Council meeting this week, and they asked something about that. And so I'll share some of the things I shared with them. Some of the ideas that came forward were to do some things like maybe some cohorting of gen ed courses. We need to do more in career development kind of things. And should we incorporate some of that in curriculum in a way? And when we do gen ed, we did a lot last year in terms of getting to the MTA 30, and I think that helps with our transfer enrollment and other things. But in that gen ed sequence that we have, are there things that we could do that could make it exciting and really engaging for the students? Because I still, as a dean, I would go do the parent session at orientations, and the parents are saying, what courses can we just get out of the way online? And they're talking about gen ed. And I said, I said, no, there aren't any courses to get out of the way because they're all important. But I think we need to convey that and really garner support around gen ed in a creative way with that. And so one of the ideas thrown out was, or discussed was, maybe if we cohorted a couple classes with gen ed, you could then sequence the course schedule so that there could be student activities between at a break. If you had an hour break between classes, maybe get the student government involved to, have some activities, or student services have activities during those breaks, so we could have some active presence of students on campus. It could be anything, but putting in some energy around that and time and planning, I think would be very helpful. But when I say first year experience, we're talking about that. And also we have to figure out the online experience with that too. So anyways, somebody put forward a proposal on having a virtual version of DEEP. And there are mixed feelings about this, and whether that's a good idea or not a good idea. And I think we'll be doing a lot more discussion of that. And you can imagine pros and cons on that in your own head right now. So that's, we kept that in the group, still not sure about it. We'll see where that goes. And then there were a lot of ideas about upgrading the recreation facilities to make our campus a more inviting place. Some of these went, just talk about our current rec center and some upgrades. Some were to add some sports fields, which could be used by our students and also potentially be a revenue source if they're rented out, and bring people, to our campus, that kind of thing. So there are a variety of ideas there. And then student pipelines and pathways to build that pipeline from the K-12 system to UM-Flint and have support built around that. And so there were multiple ideas around that. And so these are the ideas that are being considered and talked about. And you can see there's a lot of crossover between academic affairs and the student services in some of these ideas. And so we need to engage in some of that conversation. So next steps. Internal discussions within academic units should be occurring, and they'll occur differently in the different units. I mean, some of what was discussed last year in some of the units is just being reaffirmed this year, and so they don't need a lot of additional discussion, whereas in other units, there really needs to be more discussion. So we're giving time this fall for that to happen. And then the Strategic Transformation Integration Group will be working to integrate the academic affairs and the student affairs part, and add in the metrics, benchmarks, those types of things, so we can come up with a cohesive plan. So that group is working this fall on that. And then ultimately, when that plan is ready, I will present it to the president first. And then after getting input from him, go forward to the regents. And I know you're probably asking timeline. I would if I were sitting in your seat. And this is real tentative because it depends on all the pieces falling in. In the ideal world, I would love to be able to present something to the president in January and to the regents in February, but that depends on all these pieces coming together. So there's a lot of work between now and then. And then I plan to give periodic updates to campus when there's progress on something or whatever. I'll send out an email update by way of communication. So our future is today. We need to plan for a bright future for our campus. This is an immense opportunity for our campus to engage in the planning. There's been a lot of work to date. And I think I used the term, it's kind of like a revise and resubmit in what we're doing. I just wanted to slow down the process to give time for those revisions, because in some areas, the plans were well developed, and in other areas, it was a little bit less clear. So that's what this fall is about. So that was the end of my presentation, and I will open up for questions. And if you're in the room, I think Linda was going to run around with a mic. Because we have the Zoom people on. And if you're here and present, please say your name so that the people on Zoom know who's talking. And if you're on Zoom, please submit your questions to the Q&A, and then we'll take care of those. And I'll wait for the first question.
I am Amanda from the Department of Behavioral Sciences. My question is how the integration group will communicate with the rest of campus as they put this plan together for both student services and academic services?
Yeah, so the question was, I'll just say it again, I don't know if it came across loud enough. How will the strategic transformation integration group communicate or get communication from the rest of campus? And the deans all sit on that group. So I'm relying on the deans to bring forward the information from their units up to that group. And in student affairs, there's the people who are on that group from student affairs were selected because they relate to the different topics that are under consideration. So they'll be bringing information forward. But also, I think there will be some items where we might have to call a special meeting. You know, this first year experience, to me, that's a big topic. And it may just mean that we may need to have some open forums or something to gather more input, where, you know, it's integrating both the student services and the academic side. So if you have any suggestions for ideas, I'm open to that either during this forum or by email as well.
Makes sense. So they'll have your reporting back as well. Thank you. How often are you meeting?
We don't have a set schedule. We're meeting as needed. So we just decided we need to meet again. And so I have Linda working on scheduling that meeting right now. So for our next time. There's an online question.
This question is from Bob Barnett. He asks, and I think this is related to the Strategic Transformation Integration Group. Are there any faculty on the Student Affairs group? If we are going to integrate, we have to have the right people at the table.
The deans are representing academic affairs. So no, I do not have faculty, but the deans are responsible to bring that input forward. So.
Stephanie Roach from the Department of Language and Communication. So I'll just express my concern for there being no faculty on that group. We're talking about a major transformation of the academic enterprise, as well as the rest of the institution. And part of the process from last year did in fact rely on information coming from the deans. And you've spoken multiple times about how in different units that happened very differently. And so it is of great concern to me that there are no faculty represented on that committee. We did have, although they were underutilized with the previous process, the ITAC that did have faculty involvement, and the fact that that group wasn't even called to do a sort of a handshake crossover into the new group is also of concern. So I hope that there could be some reconsideration of faculty presence and involvement in that group.
I'll take that under consideration. Thank you.
Jennifer Albee, Department of Behavioral Sciences, just following up on what Stephanie said, and with specific reference to what you just said about a moment ago about what you're calling the first year experience. It's my understanding that in our new general education model, there are 2 units that are fundamentally responsible for delivering gen ed courses. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying exclusively, but fundamentally. And I think involving faculty from those 2 units in thinking about how a first year experience could be laid out, and not just the deans, but especially in the case of the College of Arts and Sciences, where we have a dean and no associate dean in the current context, seems to be vitally important.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And so I think around those topics, we'll be having to call in faculty. And I think in that particular area, it's not just faculty in CAS and CIT, because general ed is general to the entire campus. Yeah. And so, yeah, I recognize that they're taught out of CIT and CAS, but I think cross campus, we need input. So.
Kathy Miller from the School of Management. My question is about the off-ramps that were on your slide there that you didn't discuss. Because does that mean that if the program doesn't meet its benchmarks, it's going to need to be shut down and we need to find a way to phase it out?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that because it's hard to speak when everything's behind you, right? But that was one thing that Regent Hubbard asked for as a definition of off-ramps for anything that's proposed. If we've set a benchmark and it's time to measure that benchmark and we haven't met that benchmark, there needs to be a plan. Like, you know, if we're really close, we'll probably keep doing it, right? To see if we can achieve that benchmark. But if we're clearly not meeting that benchmark, we will have to have plans. She used the term off-ramps to get out of that program. So we aren't going to develop programs that then aren't fruitful in helping us toward this RRG kind of goal. So that may mean, I mean, we do that already with program moratoriums. We put a program in moratorium. There's a very formal plan for doing that within the university. I know I've done that with different programs out of CHS. And so that would be one of the plans, potential off-ramp plans that you could have. So, but yeah, and it would be the same on the student services side. Because student services, you know, sometimes we start a program and it's really doing well at maybe helping us retain students or something. And sometimes it's not effective. So we need to then shift that. So on both sides, whatever program we put forward, we have to figure out what those off-ramps are. And thank you for drawing that to my attention that I missed that.
Thanks so much for this, Donna. I appreciated the presentation. In many ways, it was far more transparent than anything we've seen thus far in this process, though I still have a lot of questions, pages of them, actually.
Sure.
I'm going to ask a question that I've asked multiple times in various ways over the last several years. And it's a question about how we're balancing all of the different competing concerns that were raised in your presentation as goals, right? So on one hand, I hear that economic advancement is the #1 thing that the regents are after, right? I'm also hearing the RRT stuff, right? And then there's the question of the bottom line, right? And so how are we thinking about balancing? I mean, this is a question of values and mission, right? What about a program that has great metrics on RRT, right, is helping with economic advancement, but is costing the university money? What about a program that is making tons of money for the university, but is not good on these metrics, right? Like, so how are we balancing these things? And for me, this really like gets to the heart of the matter of what it means to be a university versus just any other business.
Well, I'll start out in saying we can't be everything to everybody, right? We're sitting at 6,100 students. We can't do everything and have every major that a university would have. A large university like an R1. So we have to recognize that. In terms of that balance, if a program is doing well with RRG, odds are their budget is pretty good. And I can't think of examples where that might not be true. So we'll look at that. And I will say that there are times where you do choose. And I use this as an example because it's a program that started under my administrative leadership in PT. In PT, we decided to start a PhD program. We knew that the PhD program would never, ever make money. Okay? But the faculty in PT were committed to that because I don't know if you know this about PT land, but in PT land, there are not enough faculty. And across the nation, there are not enough physical therapy faculty. They're really hard to find. And so as a commitment to the profession, the department decided to start a PhD program. They knew it would never pay for itself. It would pay part of its way, but not all of it. And so they were willing to fund that, the rest of that, out of their other PT programs. And so that was a commitment made within that department where they were absorbing that commitment within the department. So there are times when you might make decisions, but it has to have that support.
I can follow up really quickly there. So I want to point this out, and I want to be clear, I'm not putting this out as a criticism of you. I think it illustrates a point, right? So you literally just said there, I can't think of an example where what you described
and then
happened.
I thought
and
more.
you immediately went to an example. And I think this is important, right? Because in my disciplines, in the sociological disciplines, we would, that statement that you began with, right? We would think of that as an ideological predisposition, an ideological idea that like kind of overshadows all of this, right? But when we actually look at the evidence, we find that not to be the case, right? Sure. And so that particular ideological idea, right, that these goals are all aligned, right? And we just like, if we just do this, then everything else will fall into place, seems to be structuring the whole process. And I really worry about that, right? I really worry that we're either going to lose our soul to pay the bills, or we're not going to be able to pay the bills because we're so wrapped up in our soul. And we need to be thinking about all of these things together because they are not always one and the same.
I agree. And it's just like your home budget. At home, you know that things are going to cost more or less. And sometimes you're willing to scrimp in one area to pay for another area. But the bottom line is the bottom line. You still have to pay for it. And that's what the university, we are an academic enterprise, but we're also a business. And our business is academe, but we still have a bottom line we have to make. And so when I presented a similar presentation to this at the Faculty Senate Council, I presented to them and to the executive committees, and somebody asked me, I forgot who it was, asked, do you have a list of programs we're going to shut down? And my answer was no. Because that's not, while ultimately, I'll be the one presenting anything to the regents, those decisions are things that have to come out of discussions of the faculty, because faculty need to be involved in discussions about where your priorities are. Administrators will have to make hard decisions, but we can't do it without the input of faculty. And I don't want this to be a discussion mostly about that. It's about, we need to focus our funds in areas where we can grow, because we need enrollment in order for us to meet our bottom line. And so I'm just asking for faculty input on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Nobody has ever said that you have to balance our. That's a little bit ridiculous, but yeah.
This question is from Kim Sachs. She asks, are there examples from Ann Arbor for similar off-ramps and metrics that Regent Hubbard is drawing upon for this suggestion, or that we can model from?
I do not know of any. I don't know. It was a comment that she took, and I think off-ramps are things that we can figure out. They're pretty obvious. If a program isn't working, you need to shut it down in a respectful way to the students. So and cover. There's very specific procedures for that.
Adam Lutzker, economics. For me, the magic black box part of this is thinking that we can predict future enrollment trends or figure out market demand. And I see the language there, but it feels very abstract to me. And when reading the Huron stuff, where they were trying to sort of guesstimate future demand, they were basically making reference to some proprietary data set that they weren't sharing with the rest of us. And at least in sort of macroeconomics, the past history of predicting future trends in the labor market is pretty bad. The Bureau of Labor Statistics always publishes this 20-year projections for the labor market. And in like 1970, when they're predicting 1990, they missed the personal computer revolution. So like all the technological shocks that are happening aren't part of the projection. So it feels like a weird gamble in scientific language to say that we're going to try and guess the market or beat the market for future enrollment.
Well, I agree there is some guessing going on there. But the problem is we can't stay the same. So we have to do something different than we're doing. And so we use our best data that we have. I mean, Huron provided data, but I know in my area, I went back and looked at data coming out of the various fields. I did a lot of digging into the programs that we were looking at to see if there was anything from the professional associations about workforce demands of the future and things. And so it takes digging to find that information. And Huron gave us one set of data, but and I know people had some qualms about that, but I know in my area, I went and dug further. And that's what everybody should be doing, looking for that data to see where the opportunities are. And you're right, data's not perfect and predictions aren't perfect, but that's why, and I think the regents recognize that and say, you may start something, you may take a risk and you may start something that doesn't pan out. We need an off-ramp.
So the other big bit of data that's coming, right, is that the birth rate dropped dramatically in 2008, basically 20% nationwide. And all those missing high school graduates hit college or don't hit college in 2026. So we're right at the edge of what's called the demographic cliff. And the demographic cliff goes on at least for 15 more years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we all recognize that. That's why we need to take some action now.
This question's from Stephanie Dean. She says, is there an expectation that there will be current programs in existence now that go away in order to balance costs?
I don't know if there's an expectation. It's a reality that sometimes we do that when we're looking at balancing budgets. If there are existing programs that aren't, where we just don't have a lot of activity, where there's not a lot of enrollment in them or something, that's something that the units may look at.
Derwin Monroe asks, the break-even approach to making decisions has always been at the program level. Is it possible for that calculus to take place at the unit level, as was explicit in the PT-PhD program?
Actually, the PT-PhD program was done at the program level or at the department level because that's the way CHS operates, where the budget is maintained at the department level. So that answer may vary by unit.
Okay, this is a question from Jerry Sanders. He says, thank you, Chancellor, for the presentation. This is a multi-part question. Has the quality—
one part at a time.
Okay. Has the quality or success of our UM-Flint graduates been considered as a benchmark?
One of the things that we're having, we just had a discussion actually in our cabinet meeting about this today. and looking at where our students go after they graduate, how many are successful getting jobs in their field of study, that kind of thing. And we don't have good data. I would love to present that data as a benchmark, but we have to find a more effective means of getting that data. And so Sandra was there. We were talking about that today and how we can increase our ability to get that data, because I think that's valuable data.
So the example he gives is, considering biology produced 1/3 of the Maize and Blue Scholarship Award recipients, I think it could be appreciated as a quality program. A significant hindrance to the program is limited support staff. And he gives an example about the reduction of staff. A replacement has not been hired and the workload is overwhelming the current staff. Are the current laboratory sciences a priority for the future? And if so, can technical support staff be hired to meet the demand before it damages the quality of the program?
I know that Chris Pearson has been talking about that. So it's certainly on his mind and trying to address that. So I don't know if you want to say something, Chris.
So certainly, yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that question. And we are moving forward with these hires in the support staff areas.
No other questions? Okay, so I really appreciate the questions that came in and your comments. If you have any other thoughts after leaving, feel free to email me with your questions, your thoughts, whatever. Also, I heard loudly, because several of you at the very beginning talked about faculty engagement. And so I'll take that back to our team and we'll figure out ways to have faculty engaged, and I'll communicate out something on that. And I think that wraps it up for today. So I appreciate you coming, whether you're online or in person.